what you want, when you want it, where you want it. This is The Mesh.
This podcast is sponsored by Jackson Creative, a custom communication agency located in downtown Hickory, specializing in online content creation. To learn more, visit thejacksoncreative.com. Jackson Creative, we tell your story.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the FOREcast. I'm your host, Alan Burton. Thank you for listening to this new golf podcast on The Mesh. And be sure to check out all the other shows on themesh.tv. They're all produced right here in the western region of North Carolina. The FOREcast and all other Mesh shows are available on Apple iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher Radio, and all other favorite podcast apps. We have an amazing guest today, a really good friend of mine, a gentleman I have known and been mentored by and coached by for the better part of 8 or 9 years now, I would guess. This fella is the owner, inventor, and guru of all things in the green reading and putting world. He is the owner and inventor of Aim Point Golf. His name is Mark Sweeney, and Mark has taken some time out to spend with us this morning, and let's talk putting. So I am so happy to welcome Mark to the show. Mark, thanks for taking time to join us this morning.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Well, I know you travel the world, and you've done some amazing things for our game of golf. And when I first came across your information, it came to me through a friend and another good golf instructor friend of ours, Jason Sutton, down in Charlotte. And Jason was hosting an Aim Point green reading clinic at his golf course down at Carmel Country Club in Charlotte. And I had seen the book that you used to teach out of, and this book had all these numbers in it and these circular diagrams. And I'm looking at this. Bobby Clampett actually showed it to me and said, "Alan, have you seen this?" And I said, "Bobby, that looks like hieroglyphics, man. What the heck is that?" And he started to explain it to me a little bit, and I said, that is fascinating. As a golf instructor who's, for the last 20-plus years, tried to help golfers, I'm always open-minded and open ears to someone that has information. And when he showed me this, it just piqued my curiosity. I said, I have to learn about that. That is amazing. That is incredible. So what you've been able to do for the industry is commendable. And at this point in my career, I don't know how I would have made it this far without this information to teach players. Let's talk about where this thing started for you and tell us how you got to where you are. Where did this thing begin?
Well, it started as me just watching golf on TV and not understanding why the best players in the world were not particularly consistently good green readers. You know, sometimes they were great and sometimes they would just blatantly miss putts. That always shocked me. And I had a background in software development, so I actually, as a hobby, just went out and wrote some software and kind of figured out how to piece together the puzzle of how do you predict what a ball is going to do on a green. And that was in 2003. Came together pretty fast, and then ended up using that on Golf Channel on TV for about 6 years, which made us perfect the math on it. Because on Golf Channel, I had to predict any putt on any green under any conditions for any player of any length to any hole position. I had to be accurate to within 2 inches, and that included wind, grain, green speed, everything. And so there was a very high demand on accuracy, and so spent a lot of time getting that right. And then once it was right, thought to myself, there's a lot of things that people that I see as, simulating these putts and geometry of green reading that people just don't know. And so I started to get into teaching, and what took a long time was going from the super complicated computer program to, what we see now as express reading and maintaining pretty close to the same level of accuracy. That took, 10 years to get to that level. Right. But it was, what you originally saw with the chart was kind of in the middle. It was still fairly complicated, and you were what we call an early adopter in that, which was great. There's a number of great instructors who got in early because they realized there's value to the information. But we still took a little while to figure out how to simplify it down to where anybody could use it.
Exactly. And your television broadcast product that was on the Golf Channel for so many years actually won an Emmy for technical achievement in 2008. And that's just an amazing accomplishment. And if you go back now, I think we can still see on YouTube some of those older broadcasts where you're putt predicting program was shown on the screen, and how accurate it was just phenomenally fascinating for me and certainly for the viewer. We miss that. We don't see that today, do we, when we see the broadcast?
No, I miss it too. The very last putt we ever did was Justin Rose at the Tour Championship, and it was about a 50-footer with about 30 feet of break, and it went right down the line the entire way into the hole. And the line was 3 inches wide, so I had a 3-inch margin of error.
Wow.
And that was one of the best putts we ever did. It was actually the very last one we ever did on air.
Wow. Fantastic. I mean, your experience with over 100 PGA and LPGA Tour players, and we're talking about 9 major winners. We're talking about 3 number 1 players in the world. There's a reason why players are seeking out your information and utilizing it to play golf for a living. The information is so accurate, and that's one of the reasons that I got involved. Is it just blew me away when I realized there was information available to be a better green reader. I mean, golfers forever thought about the myths of green reading. We hear this in our clinics all the time. I think you know this, and that the grain grows toward the water. The grain grows toward the setting sun. The ball breaks towards the Las Vegas Strip. If you're at TPC Summerlin, it breaks toward Rays Creek. If you're at Augusta, Indio and Palm Springs. I mean, all these myths that you hear. And the real physics of it is simply not considered by a lot of golfers. And they need to understand the physical factors, don't they, Mark, if they're going to be better green readers?
Yeah, I mean, the proof is, well, first of all, if you could bend the laws of physics on golf courses, NASA would be out on golf courses trying to figure out why that's going on. And so it doesn't happen. And the proof was we did 6 years of live TV, and the only thing we ever knew about a putt was what was between the ball and the hole. We had no concept of where downtown was, northeast, west, south, rivers, oceans, mountains. We didn't know. We didn't care because we didn't need to add that in as a variable to get the putt right. So all we knew was from point A to point B, there's a certain amount of slope, and the green was a certain speed, and if there was wind, throw some wind in, and that was it. And we never had a problem ignoring all those other factors. And that's it can cause some pretty heated discussions when I tell people, no, the mountain doesn't actually push the ball. The doesn't actually pull the ball. There is no force acting on it. And for me, it's just if you really can't read greens, that's something you default to as well. I don't know, so it must go towards the water, which obviously doesn't have to happen at all.
Right. And what was fascinating for me as a young instructor, I certainly watched players hold their putter up and try to plumb bob a putt. And in my mind, I knew there was no real dependable accuracy with their method, but I didn't know enough about the physics involved to explain it away. And so when people held their putter up, I was fascinated that they believed that was the best way to choose a target for a putt. But as I learned more, and you shared with me so many great concepts about what's actually physically causing the ball to do what it does, it's very simple for me to explain why that may work and why that would probably not be very dependable on a regular basis, especially if green speeds were changing.
Yeah. It's if you don't have anything and that's all you have, that's all you have. But I'm to a stage now where occasionally I'll get somebody come in and take a putting lesson who doesn't do aim point, and my response is really, well, if you're not a naturally good green reader, I can't help you any other way. I can teach you very, very accurately how to read a green. But if you're just guessing on your own and you're not accurate, I still, to this day, I've been teaching green reading for 15 years. I still don't know any other way that's going to give them consistently good reads. Right. Some people naturally read greens well, and that's great, but you can't take that and transmit it to somebody who doesn't. If you ask a great green reader, how do you do it? They go, I don't know.
Right.
I said, can you teach somebody who doesn't know how to do it? And the answer is always absolutely not. So we as coaches have to have a way to give somebody a skill that they don't naturally have, and that's where aim point kicks in.
Exactly. I think where a lot of good green readers might say that, well, the reason I'm a decent green reader, and they probably aren't really aware of this, they've hit so many putts across so many different slopes and so many different green speeds, their brain becomes capable of remembering a picture, and they're matching those pictures from their memory from hitting thousands of putts. And I think it might have been you that even told me this. I think when you asked, I believe it was, I don't remember if it was Hank Haney or certainly a great instructor, you asked him his thoughts on what does it take to be a good green reader. And I think it was you have to be a good green rememberer to be a good green reader.
Yeah, I mean, that's great if you're on tour and you play the same courses every year. But if you're a younger golfer and if you're playing different courses, or if you're new on tour, it doesn't help you at all.
Exactly.
So you've got to be able to, we as putting instructors, we've got to be able to walk out to any golf course in the world and get every read right the first time, which ideally, as a competitive golfer, you want to pretty much do the same thing. So yeah, remembering is great, but when they redesign greens, I always remember kind of watching Tiger when he would play greens that were newly rebuilt. He was never as good as when they were the older designs because they'd make subtle changes, and what he remembered the ball doing was not always what it did after the rebuild.
Exactly.
And so that was always a setback.
Well, when green speeds change, I think this past year at Augusta, there were even some comments about how the greens might have been a little slower than in years past. And the ball doesn't break as much when you have slower surfaces because you're going to have to give the ball a little more velocity to travel that distance across the slower surface. And when you have a time variable, you get different break amounts. And that's kind of what I think happened this past year for a few of them.
Yeah, I mean, golf greens are living, breathing organisms, and there's only so much you can do with speeds. And if it's hot, humid, or rainy, you've got to, as a player, you've got to dynamically adjust to the conditions. If it's hot and humid versus cold and windy, you get very, very different reactions during the day or over the grass. And you've got to be able to adjust to that. You can't just say, well, last year this putt did this.
Right.
You've got to have some ability to say, under different conditions, what will the change be? That's where aim point kicks in nicely. It doesn't really matter what the speeds are. It's very easy to adjust and get an accurate break, whether it's faster or slower.
Right. Well, let's talk a little bit about how the aim point process has evolved. I know when I first got involved, as I mentioned, there was a chart. I still use the chart. I have it in my yardage book in my back pocket every day when I'm out there teaching because I actually love the information that it provides. But what was fascinating about it, as you mentioned, we would give an aim point clinic back in those days, and we might have 8 people in a clinic, and maybe 2 out of those 8 people would really feel like that information was going to be, processed and transitioned into their daily play. They would be fascinated at the accuracy that the information was providing, but most players would find it difficult to implement the new skills that were going to be necessary to do the read with the chart. And so we were all looking for ways to simplify this process, and let's talk a little bit about how that transition occurred.
Yeah, it was actually fascinating because we had, the process was super accurate, but it relied on at least you getting at least 3 variables correct. And so it was work. I always told people it would take about 6 months to get really good at doing the chart read. And most people are not going to give it 6 months, to be fair. Right. And I probably wouldn't either if I just walked into a clinic. So it worked, but it was difficult. And I've been thinking for a couple of years, I've been kind of beating my brains over how do we make this easier. And I just didn't come up with anything. I couldn't come up with anything. I hit a wall. And then, they say invention is the mother of necessity. And I had to teach a clinic to very young kids with Rob Noel. They're like 7 and 8 year olds. And I was landing. He was texting me on the plane. And the clinic was in like 2.5 hours. And he said, you can't teach them the chart. They haven't had angles in school. They won't get it. Think of something else. And I literally had 2 hours to think of something else. So we came up with this, and you probably remember this. I
was there.
Call it the thumbs up read, where we use our thumb just on the high side of the hole just to get kids aiming on the high side of the hole. And then it turns out that if you use 1 finger per percent, it actually matches the physics of a golf ball breaking on a golf green, which was mind-blowing to me and probably everybody else at the time. I'm sure when you first saw it, you thought it was insane. Most people first saw it and they were like, yeah, that's cute, but, you got to be kidding me, right? I mean, maybe it's fine for brand new golfers or kids, but what we learned very quickly was that it was so accurate that tour players were saying, oh, I like this better. And that was a big learning experience for me with teaching, was something that I thought had to be a little bit less accurate. We got better performance out of it because it was more natural. It was visual. Right. You were facing the hole. You weren't doing numbers in your head. And we actually got better performance from players out of a process that I thought was 5% less accurate, but they performed way better, and that's when I realized, okay, this is the way to go because anybody can do it at all, regardless of experience. It's accurate. It's easy. It's fast. And then it was just off to the races at that point. That was 5 years ago now, more than 5 years ago, believe it or not.
Yeah, and I remember when we came up with this concept. I was at the conference actually, the time that the thumbs up read was introduced, and a guy was Rick Murphy and I were standing on one section of that putting green, and we were holding our thumbs up, and everybody on that putting green had thumbs up in the air that morning. And yeah, I don't know if you remember this, but I looked at Rick and I said, "Man, we got a 6% side tilt here on this putt, Rick." I said, "Man, my thumbs are fat, but 2's not going to give me near enough break for this putt."
2 is not going to do it, and that's right.
And he looked at me and he said, "Well, what are we going to do?" And I actually said, "Man, we're on a 6." And I said, "I think if we put up 6 fingers, we could probably get this thing playing high enough." And he said, "Well, try one." So that's where it started for me. I put those fingers up, and I said, "Wow, that was incredibly close." And from there, it was like, well, I don't want to blow this whole thing out of the water. The thumbs up is a cute concept, and it really seems cute, but I don't think it's going to calibrate. And so he convinced me to come over to you and share with you what we had done, and it was was fascinating from that point.
That was the first moment that we did 1 finger per percent. I distinctly remember it because 2 weeks later I went to Europe for the conference, and me and Rob Cheney went out by ourselves for 2 hours. And I said, "Just do me a favor, just hold up 1 finger per percent, and I'm going to compare it to the chart."
Yeah.
And everything was within an inch or two. It was mind blowing. And he was making every putt he looked at. We didn't even know what we were doing. We didn't know how to change double breaks or long putts. And he was still making literally everything he looked at. And that's when my head was swimming. I was just like, I don't get this. How can this possibly work? I get it why it works now, but at the time it was like magic.
Yeah.
It made no sense at all.
And with a kid who's got a smaller finger and a shorter arm to an adult who has a longer arm and maybe a bigger finger, those pictures actually humanly calibrate pretty nicely too, don't they?
Yeah, the geometry of your body is very similar across different ages. Like I've done the Express with 8-year-old kids who see the exact same break that I see. Right. There's little changes with hand size and arm length, but not much at all. I mean, I've never met anybody who couldn't fit everything from stimp 8 to stimp 12 in their natural arm positions. That's the really cool thing is, and it also happened to work out with percentage of slope. So 1 finger per percent works perfectly, which is we've always done everything in percent. It doesn't work in degrees, but it does work in percent perfectly. So it was just stroke a lot.
Well, and that speaks to the reason that we as Aimpoint certified instructors want the golfers out there to come seek us out, because our information is so much better researched, and to get accuracy out of this process, you really need to get the information from a certified instructor. It's like a joke. If you tell it correctly, it's going to be funny. If you tell it wrong, you're going to miss the punchline, and it's not going to be good. So we want you to go to a certified instructor and get this information because it has been thoroughly researched, and it'll make a huge difference.
Yeah. And I can't tell you how often. I mean, I even watch PGA Tour sometimes, and I watch guys, doing Aimpoint, trying to do Aimpoint, and they're doing it completely wrong.
Right.
Major mistakes that are just going to, reduce the accuracy of it. And they obviously didn't learn from an instructor. They learned from a friend or somebody. Or I had a junior I was teaching yesterday who played with a guy who was same thing, trying to do Aimpoint, but he was feeling the slope on top of the hole. And things that might intuitively you might think are correct if you don't understand Aimpoint,
right?
But aren't, Right. And so you really want to learn it right the first time, get the process correct, and then it works great. But don't try to make stuff up. I see all kinds of people saying, "Well, maybe it works better if I do it this way or that way." Right. And what you have to realize is the Express read we've tested for almost 6 years now, 5.5 years or more. And we know it works and we know it doesn't work, even though it might seem counterintuitive to somebody who is new to it.
Right. Well, even the golf broadcast folks did not understand the process, and they were just throwing stuff out there to the listener and the viewer. And we heard a lot of comments about, well, they're looking at the percentage on the slope, or they're looking at the degrees on the slope, and they didn't know the difference between percentage and degrees. And it is not degrees; it's percent when you're reading it through the Aimpoint process. And if, like you said, if you get it wrong, you're going to get the wrong answer, and you'll think Aimpoint's not correct. But it is very, very accurate.
Yeah. I mean, degrees and percent are different units of measure. It's like metric versus imperial, or Celsius versus Fahrenheit. They're completely different. You cannot interchange them. and have it even remotely work correctly. So it is amazingly accurate. And I would never release anything out to the public that I haven't tested for at least 6 months. And I think that's, people who know me probably know that's true. But if you don't know me, there's nothing I would just throw out there. Right. Everything that you've seen, even as a certified instructor, and you see it first, I've spent 6 months, doing skunk works on and trying to wring out the bugs and trying to break it before I would give it to anybody else to use.
Well, absolutely, especially when you're dealing with as many professional golfers as you are, and you see so many of these top players in the world now using the process and using their fingers and feet to read the greens. We studied this, and we understand that if we can help our players, for instance, a top 25 tour player that you might be working with, if you can help them make one more putt a tournament for an entire season, that's $1.7 million more they're going to make. So
it's huge. It's huge money for them, and it's for juniors. I teach a lot of competitive juniors, and they haven't had the experience to figure out green reading. They haven't had 20 years of watching putts roll,
right?
And you can get them reading greens spectacularly well in 20 minutes, 30 minutes, even as a young teen or a preteen.
Absolutely.
And then when that happens, now they can actually be freed up to get better at speed, to get better at hitting their line, and not be so stressed about, thinking that every time they miss a putt, people always think it's a mechanics problem. It's usually not a mechanics problem. It's usually a read first, speed second, and mechanics third. And they usually do it in the exact opposite order, which is holding them back pretty badly.
Absolutely. And when they miss a putt, their first thought is, it must have been my stroke. And so they're going to want to change a lot of things in their stroke that might not need to be changed. But that's the process that we're trying to help golfers with. And what my experience has shown is that golfers in general have no real clue about how much a ball breaks. When I ask a player about a 10-foot putt across a 2% slope on a 10 stemp, I'll demonstrate that putt, and I'll set it up, and I'll say, well, how much do you think this ball actually breaks? Constant answer, about 2 inches. I'll play about 2 inches out. I said, well, you're going to have to hit that thing pretty hard if that's actually the line you want to hit your ball on. And you say, well, it's how about 9 inches? How about 9 inches? And when you put a marker out there at 9 inches, they look at you like, no way this thing's going to break that much. I said, well, when you coordinate the correct speed with this line, I think you'll see why it's going to break 9 inches. And you just have to set those kind of putts up and constantly show golfers that putts break more than you think because you're just not good at getting the speed correct. And that's why they three putt. So if we help a golfer, a recreational golfer, eliminate three putts, gosh, that's huge. I mean, that's going to be huge.
Yeah, it's interesting because I do a lot of performance analysis also. I was doing performance analysis before I did aim point, believe it or not. And one of the top two things to reduce bogeys for higher handicaps is three putting.
Exactly.
Greens is number one, and three putting is actually the number two thing.
Yeah.
Which is primarily, if your read is off and your speed is off, so you have a double miss, and you're going to three putt way too often.
Yeah, and I constantly have to twist a player's arm to give them a putting lesson, and they're out on the range saying, I need to get a new driver. I need to hit this driver farther. I just don't hit it far enough. And of course that may be true, but then when they have 6 3-putts around, well, hey, there's some low-hanging fruit over here. We need to go pick this low-hanging fruit, pal. Hey, I'm 260 pounds. I can't dunk a basketball, and I don't think I'm ever going to, so I need to learn how to do something else.
I gave up trying to hit it longer about 3 years ago. I just move up a tee now.
Yeah, absolutely.
The vanity of having to play from the back where the men play. I'm just like, I don't want to hit 3 irons into the greens anymore.
No way. Yeah, and as we look at golfers, how they visualize putts, and I think you can speak more to this, but we're seeing that not every golfer is viewing the putt the same way. Their picture of what they like to see, and we're discovering new ways to help golfers see the putt best for them. Some of the new concepts that the aim point process has discovered as we look at entry to the hole, as an angular relationship. Let's talk a little bit about the entry points that we've worked on.
Yeah, we traditionally as an aim point instructor, we've always said, here's your aim, here's where you start the ball will break in from there. And it's been very natural for us to teach and think that way. But there's a lot of players who want to visualize curve and apexes, and they want to see the shape of the putt, not just roll it to it. And so starting about a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago now, a year and a half ago, I started to address that by figuring out, okay, how do I know where to aim, but let me figure out how to accurately show the shape of the putt. So if there's a player who wants to see the shape or the curvature, we can actually very, very accurately show them that right now. It takes about 1 second, and it's helped quite a few golfers. And it's not the apex we're showing because it's a point, that aim point that we calculated personally because it's easy to find. And you actually named it, Alan, the drop point. Very similar to the apex, but it's where the ball starts down towards the hole. And I've been teaching it now for about a year and a half, and I have some golfers who love it and just their performance jumps through the roof. I have some that don't care at all, and
Sure.
So as an instructor, we need to be able to help anybody who walks in the door, regardless of what they want to visualize. And we're there now. We can show you anything you want to see about the putt. And just with a little pretty simple test, we can figure out how that player performs the best.
And that's the fascinating thing is that we can take the information and we can apply it to the player in the best possible way for them to feel comfortable with it and see it the way they like to see it and get more accuracy with their reads through all those different methods. It's fascinating to me that there is a science, a measurable science. And I would say that the majority of people that are reading greens in the old-fashioned way, they're walking around the putt, they're looking at it from 4 different directions, they're spending so much more time. And aim point forever has had an improper rap, if you will, as if it's going to slow the player down. And I see quite the opposite. I see once the player gets the aim point process, they're faster at getting the correct target than a golfer who's walking around, holding their putter up and seeing the putt from all 4 sides. And it's just not true that aim point is a slower process. If anything, It's a much faster process.
Yeah, I mean, back when we were doing the chart read and you were learning how to do the chart, I could see how it could slow you down a little bit. But I stopped teaching the chart 6 years ago.
Yeah.
And if you're doing a proper express read inside 10 feet, it should take 4 or 5 seconds. And I watch players now walking around all sides of the hole, and I can't watch anymore. Like, I'm thinking to myself, if things were reversed, so if the natural way to read a putt was to step over it, feel it, and step back, and then I came out and said, you know what, I want you to change that. I want you to look from behind the ball, look from the other side of the hole, look from underneath the ball, then go back and plumb bob and then hit it. People would absolutely come after me with pitchforks for slowing the game of golf down.
Right.
But the funny thing is that's the standard that even that you see on TV, I can't watch it on TV. I have to turn it off because it makes me crazy.
Right.
And that doesn't get a bad rap at all.
No. It's funny. It's just people of old habits. They are so hard to break. I mean, I recognize that. My dad is 83 years old. Okay, plays golf a couple times a week and shoots his age quite frequently. So he's a good player. I'm not going to get my dad to do aim point. I'm sorry. He just says, man, that stuff is just, Dad, it's so simple. and it's like he doesn't own a smartphone. He doesn't need one. He hasn't had one for 83 years. So why would I buy one now?
More stress than we have.
Well, yeah, absolutely. But getting people to change. I know I was at a facility here in town that had a Champions Tour event. And so all those older players and trying to convince them that we had some information that would help them was like, oh, man, it was like going up Mount Everest with a pair of tennis shoes on, Incredibly.
Yeah, it's funny because I've never even tried to go out to Champions Tour and help, but there are quite a few guys out there who do aim point very well.
Absolutely.
McCarron does. McCarron was actually the
he's the grandfather of starting it. Yeah,
he is the first tour player to ever pick up the chart and use aim point. He's done it very, very, very successfully, actually.
Yeah, talk about how it helped his putting too. I mean, goodness gracious, didn't he climb up from like 190th in putting? Yeah, once he started doing aim point, he got into the top 10 of maybe not number 1 in putting there on the Champions Tour for a while.
Yeah, I mean, he was 180 or worse every year prior to aim point. Then he went to top 10 every year after that. Now he's won. How many times he won on Champions Tour? A zillion.
Yeah, exactly.
But there's more guys out there doing it than you think, even on the Champions Tour. But I never really bothered, pushing it out there, probably for the same experience you had,
Yeah, it's tough. It's a tough sell when you got these guys. I've been doing this for 45 years, kid. You got nothing for me,
Right.
Well, I remember when I first bought TrackMan, it was kind of the same thing. I was on the range there at the Champions Tour event, and I'd just gotten TrackMan. This was about 7 or 8 years ago, and one player said, "Man, I don't need that machine to tell me what I'm doing with my golf ball." And I saw on Twitter 3 weeks after that, he had gone out to Las Vegas, this particular player, and he sought out an instructor who's known as TrackMan Maestro on Twitter. So he was definitely using TrackMan there.
It's funny because I always get this, the naysayers will say, well, Jack Nicklaus didn't need aim point. That's at the time he didn't. And you know what? If you go back another 100 years, they didn't need Titleist balls and Metalwoods. But the reality is competition keeps evolving, and good players are going to look for competitive advantage. And as they get competitive advantage, the field needs to catch up. And before Jack, they didn't use yardage books. A single person on tour who plays that yard just now, there's no way, right? Because you're at a disadvantage if you don't, and it's becoming that way with aim point, where you are going to be disadvantaged if you don't know how to use it.
Right. So back in the days when we were teaching out of our chart, I got a lot of blowback from students about knowing the exact distance they were from the hole to actually do the read. And I would say to them, "Hey, you have a rangefinder?" And, of course, they would say, "Yeah, I have a rangefinder." And I'd say, "Well, how much did you spend on that rangefinder?" And they'd say, "Well, $400, I think." I'd say, "Wow, it really meant a lot to you to know the distance of your approach shot from the fairway, but when you get on the green, you really don't want to know the distance of your putt." It's just fascinating to me. And so it's been a mentality that I'd brought as a coach now to my lessons to the players. I say, we want to know what we can know and guess less. And that's exactly what aim point does. It helps players know more about the physical factors that are involved and choosing a good target for this putt. And there certainly isn't an exact point that the putt has to be hit at. There's a coordination of speed with that line that's so important. I refer to it as the compatibility between your line and speed. And there's an aim window, if you will. I think we all know that you can play a putt a little higher with softer speed. You can play it a little lower with firmer speed. And we're trying to find players that acceptable window. And that's what aim point does. It shows you where it is. So that's really what it offers to understand.
There's a window, but it's not as big as people think. There's a window for how long or how short you can hit a certain club. Maybe not how short, but how long you can hit a club. And if you're trying to hit a sand wedge 190, it's not going to happen, right? And if you try to play 1 inch of break on a 10-footer on a 2% slope, it will never, ever, ever go in. And so what we're saying is, let's very, very quickly show you where the middle of that window is, and you can tweak it an inch or two up or down, but that's about it. Yeah. And anything outside that window, you will not make the putt. And so why bother even trying to hit putts and breaks that are completely unmakeable?
Well, I've tried to explain to players too, and showing them that the aim zone is going to widen as the break amount increases, and the wider that aim zone is, the more difficult their putt is.
Absolutely. I mean, because then you've got to match up your speed and aim much more precisely. If you have a straight putt, you can hit it straight in at a slow speed or a fast speed. But the more and more slope you get, the more those have to coordinate with each other. Otherwise, the ball doesn't go in because the ball is moving laterally so quickly. And we all know, obviously, big breaking putts harder to make than a straighter putt. Right. But it gets dramatically harder to make. Your typical putts, 1, 2, even 3%, you don't have a huge window. Right. And as soon as you get bigger than that, it gets tough.
So the better the player, the more aware they have to be about positioning their ball appropriately on the slope to give themselves the high percentage putt. And I think a lot of times golfers think they putt poorly, and of course that may be true, but the reality is they may be in the wrong position on the slope to begin with. They've got a very low percentage putt because of the break amount, and the slope they have to deal with to coordinate line and speed becomes much more difficult. So that's what we need to make players aware of, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean the old adage, pin high on older greens that are steeper is death. Right. I mean, if you're high across 3s and 4s all day, you're not going to make anything.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, and that's going to affect their expectation levels. And I think that's interesting as I deal with putting. A lot players have just the wrong expectations where it comes to making putts. And there is a PGA Tour average statistic that most players are surprised by when I give them this. I say, hey, how many putts do you think a pro averages from 10 feet? And I think most people guess around 7 or 8. I said, well, yeah, that's what you see on television on Sunday when that guy's winning. But it's closer to 4, isn't it? It's 4 out of 10 as the PGA Tour average from 10 feet.
The best in the world miss more than they make from 10 feet. And I'm constantly reminding all levels of players that is that outside 7 or 8 feet, you're going to miss more than you make. So it's not about getting frustrated about missing. It's have you made your fair share? And if you're making 1 out of 7 or 8 from 20 feet, you're playing like a tour player.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly right. Well, Mark, I tell you, the golfer that is listening today will do themselves a huge favor if they seek out an Aim Point certified instructor and learn what we can share with them about green reading. In addition to that, speed control. That has been a big movement in our instructional message to share how to control speed better, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I've started teaching speed the last 2 or 3 years now, and I do it at every level of player, whether you're a brand new golfer, which I would teach speed first to, as they get better and better, speed has to be taught hand in hand with the read. The read is one thing, but you very quickly got to match up your speed with it to be able to really convert putts. And even watching the NCAAs, I've been watching last night, the women's championship. Mm-hmm. And as great as those players are, there's still a couple you can pick out who just moved the putter all wrong and they had poor speed.
Absolutely.
And it's just kind of a fundamental misunderstanding of what controls speed, how to manage the way the putter moves.
Right. Yeah, I think players, I generalize this in saying this, but I think golfers have most often a very slow, short backstroke, and then they really accelerate through the ball, don't they? Especially on these longer putts or a putt that's got a lot of uphill slope or a slower green. They recruit their velocity with that massive acceleration in their stroke, and they're just unaware of why they can't control speed. So it's good.
And that's exactly what I was watching a few players do last night, and they were really struggling with the uphill, slower putts. And the best golfers and the best speed players don't do that. They're not trying to jab through the ball to create speed. They create speed earlier, and then they're very smooth with it. They typically have longer strokes. Right. And so I do spend every lesson I ever give, we spend some time on speed because that takes the longest to develop, and it has to be worked on kind of constantly.
Sure. And there's not one method that's absolutely the perfect method, but you see a combination of things that great putters do to control speed. And I think a guy asked me one time or shared this information with me. It's a great concept. He said, if I was going to ask you to drive your car into that brick wall and you had to guarantee that you were going to hit the wall at 14 miles an hour, he said, how would you do that? And I thought about that for a second. He said, you probably wouldn't park the car really close to the wall and hit the accelerator and hope that you were 14 miles an hour when you crashed into the wall. You would get back from the wall enough distance to get up to 14 miles per hour and give yourself plenty of cruising speed and distance to get 14 miles per hour and then hit the cruise control and then you crash into the wall at 14 miles an hour. And I thought, well, that's kind of what golfers do when they putt. They guarantee a particular impact velocity required for that putt by getting that speed well before impact, and they just cruise through the ball at that speed. And
yeah, that might be the best analogy I've ever heard, actually, because that's exactly right. If you start close to the wall and are gunning it, the chance of you hitting 14 miles an hour is pretty slim versus get up to 14 and then just lay off. And that is what you see the best players do. They get their speed earlier in the forward stroke, and then they kind of ride it out through impact.
Exactly. And we obviously know that as geeky as we are about putting, that the putter is going to slow down at the moment of impact. But it's not accelerating aggressively through impact as we used to hear people teach that. We want you to accelerate through the ball. And it's like, ugh.
Yeah, I think that concept has really ruined a lot of players, frankly. Accelerating through the ball makes them short and jabby. In my opinion, it can make them yippy also.
Absolutely.
Some people I've seen that are very yippy tend to be short, very fast accelerators. So it always makes me very nervous when I see that.
Yeah, it's difficult to transition and move the handle, the shaft, and the club head, at the same rate when you're pulling on that handle and changing that velocity so rapidly through your transition. I think that makes a lot of challenge for golfers. And certainly I see that a lot with recreational players. But that's what they're told to do. They're told to accelerate through the ball. And I guess maybe they had this massive backswing at one time and extremely scared to hit the putt too hard because it hit one 10 feet by, and then they have this massive deceleration. Right. And so they're just told to do the opposite, but that's not going to work for them very well on a consistent basis. One thing I've tried to get players to do is when they practice, and I stole this from a fellow aim point instructor, John Graham. John used to put a coin on the green and say, I want you to stop the ball on this coin. And I transitioned that to another concept where you putt to an old hole. I want you to stop the ball on the old hole, the hole that's plugged up that you can see. But when golfers putt to a hole, they might see the ball go in and immediately assume that was a great putt. And it's right. You're completely robbing yourself of the feedback about how that ball's speed was going to encounter with a hole. And we like to call it capture speed, but we can see the capture speed much better if we get a player to roll a ball to a point on the green. Maybe it's a coin, maybe it's an old hole, but they can see where that ball is going to come to rest in relation to their target and get a better insight to how they're controlling delivery speeds.
Yeah, I mean, if your ball's ever hitting the back of the cup, you're hitting it way too hard.
Right.
Way too hard. And you'd be surprised if you roll it over a fake hole or something, for it to go a foot and a half past the hole. It's not going very fast at the hole itself.
Right.
It's going a lot slower than most people think to go that far past.
Yeah, and when you putt uphill to a hole, the back of the hole is much higher than the front edge of the hole, so you're gaining some benefit putting into that uphill hole that you probably aren't even aware of.
Yeah, no question about it.
The speed can be much more aggressive and still go in the hole, and then when you're putting downhill, it's the reverse. The back of the hole is lower than the front edge of the hole, especially on a steep slope. So it's a big physical factor there at the hole when you have that slope around the rim of the cup.
Yeah, I do, particularly birdie length putts. We do a lot of speed control work, where minimum to me is about 4 inches past the back of the hole, and maximum is about 2.5 feet. Mm-hmm. Anything short of that, anything long of that's an equal fail, frankly, because you never want to trade off a 3-putt for leaving one short.
Right.
And so, especially with junior competitive golfers, spend a lot of time where only in that window is it acceptable. Anything outside that window is a fail.
Yep. Fantastic. Well, if golfers are listening, they're going to benefit greatly by finding an Aim Point certified instructor to spend a little time with. You can come see me here in Hickory, North Carolina. You can chase Mark Sweeney down when he's not flying to China or Europe. He's going to be somewhere around Orlando. I think you're still over at the Waldorf Astoria Golf Club. Is that correct, Mark?
Yep, I'm in the Waldorf. I'll be there. I'm there on and off during the summer, but that is the home club that I teach out of, yeah.
And as far as a golfer wanting to seek out a little time with you, would they want to email you, or how would you like them to try and reach out to you?
Email is the best way. Just go to aimpointgolf.com. You can get my email there and email me. There should be my schedule should actually be available on there also, although it'll be blocked out. I'm gone for the next couple of weeks. But that is another way to do it also.
Fantastic. Well, Mark, I can't thank you enough for spending a little time with us here on the forecast and talking about putting. We'd love to have you back soon. We'd love to have you come back in, and maybe if you're in the area, you can come into the studio and do a show with us as well. But we can't thank you enough for spending a little time with us and sharing some of your genius, and look forward to seeing you again down the road, my friend.
Great. Thanks. Anytime.
All right. Take care, Mark. That was Mark Sweeney from Aim Point Golf, and I'm Alan Burton, your host. I hope you learned something about your putting today, and if you did, send us a message. You can reach us at alan@alanburtongolf.com, and you can give me a phone call if you'd like. My number is 704-232-3673. I'd love your feedback, and I'd love to hear what you have to share. What would you like to hear on our show? Anything that you'd like to learn about in the game of golf? A particular guest you'd like me to interview? Or anything at all? Please give us a call. We look forward to hearing from you. And until next time, I'm your host, Alan Burton, on The Forecast.
You've been listening to The Mesh, an online media network of shows and programs ranging from business to arts, sports to entertainment, music to community. All programs are available on the website as well as through iTunes and YouTube. Check us out online at themesh.tv. Discover other network shows and give us feedback on what you just heard.